The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. So, Eamon, the story we're going to talk about today about Chico Makamda and his ultimate deportation from the country opens up a sort of a number of different discussions, but also it allows us to delve into deportations and why they happen, which seems to be quite a complex thing.
Yeah, and I'll be straight with you. I'm not an expert in this.
I mean, who is, by all accounts?
This would have been, I suppose, Chico Makamda would have been one of these, kind of regular stories for us where we do these sex pests and, serious sex offenders when they're being released from prison. And there's been quite a few of them over the years. And, it's always a question of, like, what happens to some of these people, including the vast majority of them are Irish, by the way, that are coming out. And you're kind of wondering, like, are they going to...
Go to the homeless services and everything.
There's a mixture. Some of them have quite a lot of money. We had that, Walter Morrissey, who was a pretty nasty piece of work in for assaulting a woman who subsequently died. We won't necessarily go into the details of that. It's pretty gruesome. But, he went straight back to his own house and he owns several properties. So, he'd no need for homelessness. But Chico Makamda, he was, seemed to be pretty much a kind of a homeless drifter who ended up in Ireland. He was, as far as I could ascertain, he's an asylum seeker, an international protection candidate. And he arrived in 2009. And we know... Like I knew before, when he was released in January 22, like we knew of about 3 convictions, serious enough for attacking women and exposing himself to schoolgirls. But like we found out then this week, they actually had 19 convictions, including also for theft and larceny, as well as the sexual assaults. Now we don't have any more details from those ones, but the ones we do have details on show that he is a serious enough a sex offender. To go back to the start, we just took this as a straightforward, here's a sex offender getting out.
Yeah.
And he's a physically big guy. He's an African man with a big head of hair. He's quite recognizable. And he shuffled out with no luggage, no bags from the prison, from the Midlands. So straight off, we're kind of thinking this is a bit strange. And it turned out...
Anyone collect him?
No, he was totally on his own and he kind of didn't really seem to know what to do, but he decided to take a pee against the prison gate, so we're standing there.
You were there?
No, he didn't know we were there at that stage, and so he took pictures of them. These were used in the Sunday World at the time in January 22. And we kind of waited to see, was somebody going to pick him up? And he eventually just wandered off downtown to Portlaoise. And he went in then to eventually made his way to the train station. Now, this took him 2 or 3 hours. We wanted to wait and see would he try and interact with any women, and he didn't. But there was no talking to him. He didn't make any sense. There was nothing. It wasn't possible to have any kind of a conversation with him. He just didn't understand.
Right.
We were trying to speak to him, and I believe that we just left him. And I believe then that. He ended up trying to go back into the prison, that he didn't get a train anywhere. So it wasn't that long later, we were getting somebody sent in a picture saying, this is the chap you wrote about. Here he is on the street outside a coffee shop in Dublin in one case. And then other people were saying, saying we've seen him in Waterford. And then that turned out to be his address later it turns out that he was arrested 10 days after we saw him come out of prison. He was arrested again for failing to notify guards of his location, his address, where he was staying.
What was the crime that he had served the sentence from when he was released in 22?
In 20, well, that was from a 2018 case. So he was living in Waterford City at the time, and he basically attacked a woman in Dublin City in April 2018. It was a lady in her 50s who obviously had a bit to drink herself, and she went to relieve herself behind some bins, at which point Makamda kind of took his opportunity to start harassing her. He blocked her inside the between the bins. He punched her a couple of times in the stomach. She actually fell over, hit her head. He tried to pull her jeans down. He attempted to get on top of her. as the woman tried to stop him. He then stood up and just began masturbating like in front of her. And he only stopped when another man arrived on the scene and threatened to call the guards, and he ran off. And this lady then realised that both her wallet and her phone were missing from a handbag.
Terrifying experience. And you said he was a huge big guy.
Yeah. And he got a 7-year sentence for that attack, which is, a decent sentence for that kind of thing. But the 2.5 years of that was suspended on the proviso that he leaves the country 14 days after his release. And we now know that 10 days after his release, he was still in the country because he'd been rearrested again under the Sex Offenders Act for not notifying the guards. Yeah, what happened after that then was that he ended up back in July that year, his 2.5 years being reactivated by Dublin Circuit Courts, because obviously he had failed to leave the country, and he'd been making a nuisance of himself. We do know that. And so he was given, he basically had to serve the other 2.5 years. So that brings us up to this week, or to last week, where he was again freed from prison. And this time the Garda National Immigration Bureau had things put in place so that they were ready to deport him, and he was taken out of the country.
Right.
And they'd obviously, there were so many reasons why, it'd been slow, that it didn't happen before. Like, he'd claimed to be Angolan. Yeah, Angolan said, no, he's not ours. We don't know who he is. And there was a certain amount of confusion over his identity. Now, we did get a bit of background. There was, I think, a previous case in Tralee where he exposed himself to 2 schoolgirls. And in that case, it was mentioned that he was married, with kids, and that he was very sorry after, a short stretch of custody, and that he wouldn't do it again.
Married in this country with kids.
Well, that's what we're getting from media reports, from local newspaper reports of it. Like, it's trying to piece together who he was and what he was at. Like, there was never any. It was kind of, there wasn't much about him, if you know what I mean.
It was a bit of a drifter, kind of.
The only time we were getting any information about him was when he came in contact with the court system, and if there was a journalist there to report on the case. And then, when we see him come out of prison ourselves, and that was it. And then you're getting these photographs from, I suppose, concerned readers saying, here's the guy you were writing about. So we actually got 3 or 4 of them within a short space of time. Because, he is.
So, to understand correctly, when he agreed to leave the country 14 days after he served the sentence, when he was initially freed with the 2.5 years suspended, that would have been of his own doing. He would have had to buy his ticket and leave the country. Essentially, he wasn't going to be transported by the Irish state back home. So that's not a deportation as such. It was an agreement as part of the suspended sentence that he agreed with the judge that, look, you give me 2.5 years off my sentence and I'll be gone out of your hair. So the deportation then is a separate thing. And that order is coming from where?
They would come from, it'd be the Minister for Justice would have to sign a deportation order on somebody. Once an asylum seeker's application to remain in the country has been refused, that's it. Like they're it's up to them to leave the country, and that's the way the system has run. As far as, and we only know this. A lot of this has come out recently. It's been, I suppose, ventilated in the serious media, and it's been all over the place because immigration has become such an issue in the recent local and European elections, and we're hearing more about it. And generally, I suppose it's the easiest way of doing things. It's expensive to kind of have a coercive deportation, or or I suppose that's probably not the correct term, but to have a detainee being deported from the country
because they're taken by two Gardaí. The tickets are obviously paid for by the state,
or possibly more than that. Yeah. And then you can have issues with airlines not willing to take people who might who might have to be handcuffed, or who are threatening to attack other passengers, or have medical issues or whatever. So, airlines aren't really keen to get involved in this. So in some cases, like in other European countries, we know that, either chartered aircraft have been used, or the country's own
government jets
have been used. Now, I've no idea, was Chico Makamda flown somewhere on a government jet?
A Supergrass witness flown into the north for the last Supergrass trial by Rishi Sunak's jet. Yeah, so they're used for all sorts of stuff.
Well, they can be. And for lots of good reasons too. Yeah. Our jets are used for medical flights. Young children who need transplants in London, and that's a something that the Air Corps are always happy to talk about.
So this is really complex because the deportations can happen because the the asylum application has been refused, but they can also happen in cases where somebody is deemed dangerous, and we basically, the Justice Minister ejects them from the country and refuses to allow them in.
Yeah, and that includes, say, people who would have the right of residency here, like other EU citizens. There was one case that we did as well about a Polish man who carried out an horrific attack on a couple, raped a woman, attacked a man as well. And I think he got a 15-year sentence. So it was quite a long one. So obviously we were interested in writing about him on his release, but he was gone. And did
he serve the sentence in this?
He served the sentence, and I think in a week or two, or not even that, within a couple of days, it was obviously pre-organised, and the Garda National Immigration Bureau were ready. The minister obviously at the time had obviously signed off on it, and the person, at the centre of it, the rapist at the centre of it, had, consented to being deported. So even as a Polish citizen who would have the right to reside here, he was escorted out of the country.
And what stops him coming back in?
If there's an exclusion order served by a minister, there should be a date on it, that depends, so if the systems work like they're supposed to, you would imagine they would be stopped. But if they come in on a car, on a ferry, and come over from the north of Ireland, they probably won't be noticed until they come up on Garda radar again, and they check with the Frontex system or whatever, or the European-wide system, where these people now know that if your fingerprints are taken and all the rest, they're able to say that, you're a convicted rapist from Poland who's excluded from Ireland. And, I'm sure officials at a certain level say, well, we're excluding you now from France as well. So off you go. And I'm sure that happens.
There's a certain amount of, we could be glad that we've excluded such a violent rapist and sent him back to his home country. But of course, it can work the other direction when we have citizens who maybe are born here, who have citizenship, and they're in another country and they carry out a horrific crime. They can get kicked back to Ireland.
Yeah. And it's a figure, for some reason, I looked up not that long ago, and I think the average number of foreigners in Irish prisons are in the kind of 740, 720, that kind of figure. And one of the charities then in Ireland that helps Irish prisoners abroad has something like 1,100 on the book. So we're kind of winning in that stakes. That there's more Irish locked up abroad than there are foreigners locked up here. So we're a net exporter of criminals in that regard, you could suggest.
And one of our most high-profile criminals was, of course, himself sort of deported as such from the UK many years ago, before the beginning of the Limerick feuds.
You had the Dundons. Wayne Dundon was ended up, I suppose, back in Limerick, his ancestral home, kicking off 10 years of madness in the Limerick underworld. And that was for a burglary. I think there was an elderly lady in a wheelchair who was attacked during that aggravated burglary. So, they had good reason to kick him out of the UK.
Just because he was too violent for them as such.
Yeah, and don't forget, his father at that stage, Kenneth Senior, also had served time for putting a screwdriver through someone's cheekbone because it was in a jealous attack at defending his wife Anne. And these Dundons then arrived back in Limerick in 2000 or thereabouts and kick off a whole reign of madness and terror and, whatever.
There's your problem back as such.
Yeah. So, it is. It's. What you do.
And I wonder, can they challenge these deportation orders?
Well, anyone can. If you have access to a lawyer and someone who's willing to go to the High Court, of course you can. You can try and bring an ex parte motion to try and, or a judicial review or whatever way, to try and stop a deportation. We see that in the UK, which is similar laws to ours, where, I suppose the Tory government are bringing in legislation to try and stop people being allowed to bring any kind of legal challenge to deportation orders. But they still exist here. And people can, and sometimes for right reasons, because we're as an open country with families coming through, people don't necessarily do all the right things. So you might have a kid who is a Nigerian, for instance, who arrived here at the age of 18 months, and never knows any other country except Ireland, but never got around to regularizing the citizenship, even though, they had a right to stay. And then suddenly, they get in trouble, minor enough crime or something, and they can be facing deportation, and they've very little chance then of making their way through the system when they're technically a foreigner who's committed a crime in this country. So they end up really just having to go underground, and they're essentially become non-citizens. They're stuck in limbo. And can't leave the country.
If they commit a crime and end up before the courts in the same ways that perhaps Makamda did. He had a kind of a less than organised way of trying to sort of get around things, didn't he? His position on the Sex Offenders Acts, he claimed that he was waiting. Oh yeah, he claimed he couldn't go back to or leave the country because he hadn't got his wallet or his phone.
Yeah, which the guard said wasn't on him when they arrested him.
Right.
And he just he tried to ignore the situation or was genuinely, somebody who just didn't really know what was going on, but it was an absolute danger to people, wandering the streets. You can make so many arguments either way. Yeah, this guy is here's a clear-cut case of somebody that shouldn't be in the country, send him back to where he came from. Or you could say, if he's a genuine refugee and he has got mental health problems, then he should be in, an institution where they're treating him for his mental health issues. So it's got to be one or the other. But there he is wandering around the streets. So he's kind of in between the two extremes, but
it's
still,
kind of frightening,
still
that
a danger.
Scenario that you lay out, that the prison doors open and out comes this guy with no bag, nothing to his name, and is basically wandering around until
having a public urination moment. It's a bizarre behaviour, genuinely bizarre behaviour. It was really striking. Now, he didn't know he was being watched, and even approaching him, it just didn't seem to register.
You just didn't know who the hell you were.
He just couldn't figure it, he seems to have been well able to speak to guards in interviews, but, he certainly gave the impression that he didn't even speak English or understand it.
And that was not with translation or...
well, actually, I don't know, but, there's no evidence that... there was nothing said in court, that translators were needed. I was never there for any of these court cases, so I'm relying on what was reported. But he seemed to be well able to speak English. Certainly in one part where the woman who was attacked in Dublin city centre, he said to her, "You drank too much, bitch." So he's got a certain level of English, So he can communicate when he wants.
You, I get the impression you sort of think that this guy might have done more than maybe he was caught for.
It's hard to know. He's so recognisable, and the fact that I suppose we got his picture out there might have pushed things along a bit. I suppose that I was surprised because it happened on Saturday. We saw the email from the guards, and I haven't seen an email. I can't remember seeing an email like this where they're telling us about a deportation. Usually that stuff it's impossible to find out.
Yeah.
You put in requests to the Department of Foreign Affairs or the Department of Justice and say, can you tell us if such a recently released, or you don't even say why you want to know. You just say, can you tell me if Joe Blogg's been deported? And you're just... You don't get any information
on individual cases.
You get nothing. You get absolutely nothing from it. That it's none of our business. So,
and do you think
it's very hard
this will be a new thing with all the political debate around it all? Then that maybe from now on they are going to.
I think he's a bit of an unusual case in that it's. I think in the minds of most people, it's pretty cut and dried. If you have a sex offender expose himself, being a complete nuisance and a serious danger. One of the women, was attacked, talked about being traumatized and suffering anxiety attacks and panic attacks. So it's not harmless, dirty old man stuff like waving his willy in the park. It's which isn't to be belittled in that sense. Because that is, for some people are going to find that traumatizing. Some people might laugh it off and think it's funny, but other people leap to the next kind of step, saying, "Well, if he's doing that now, what's he going to do before I get to the end of the park and get out of here?" So it's a huge fear factor involved with these
clearly
guys.
It was a very opportunistic attack on a woman who maybe had a few too many herself and had, another passerby not come along. It's hard to know what the outcome of that would have been.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I suppose that his case, Makamda's case, I suppose is one, it was public because we had made it public.
Yeah.
Sunday World had put him out there. And at the time, as well as the Sunday World getting updates and pics of saying, we've seen him here, we've seen him there. The same thing then was going to some of the, I suppose, the anti-immigration activists on social media, and his story was being used as about, as a way to kind of a stick to beat the government and to kind of, I suppose, stir up anti-immigrant hatred and dislike. So I'm wouldn't be surprised if this is what has motivated the Garda Síochána in this case to put out a statement on Saturday to say that they had gone through. I mean, it's just it's interesting, like even just the language using it, like, it said, like, given his criminal background, this deportation was a priority operation for the Garda National Immigration Bureau. I mean, that's exceptional. Like, I haven't seen that before.
No.
So it's, and when they come back and they'd obviously gone to the Congolese officials, because they mentioned again a significant amount of engagement between officials of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Immigration Bureau facilitated obtaining travel documents, visas, and coordination of escort arrangements. So they basically got his passport sorted out. They got all his visa of whatever third country he might have to go through to fly him into Congo, because I can't imagine there's a whole lot of direct flights from Dublin to Lhasa. Isn't it Lhasa is the capital of Congo? Well, anyway.
No doubt you can go from Paris or somewhere like that, or Amsterdam, but yeah, certainly not from here.
So I mean, like there was a serious amount of effort went into to deporting him. And then that's where we got the 19 recorded previous convictions in this state for numerous sexual offences, false imprisonment and theft. So the false imprisonment would have related to that 2018 attack where he kind of blocked in the woman between the bins. Then the thefts, again, that would have been, well, we know of the two cases where he took the lady's phone and her wallet and stuff like that. But it shows you the effort that has to go in for basically what's a relatively low-level criminal, like an annoying one. But, I suppose he's the kind of, this sort of criminal is the bogeyman that the far right or anti-immigrant people love to wave about. So I guess that there was a political decision taken by the minister or by whomever to make sure that this one was flagged and put out there.
And to make sure the public were told that the system does work sometimes. Okay, Eamon, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.